A famous Zen Buddhist teacher once said, "In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities. In the expert's mind, there are few." My name is Tiffany Chenneville. I'm a professor of psychology and pediatrics at the University of South Florida, where I also serve as a Marie E. and E. Leslie Cole Endowed Chair in Ethics. I'm excited to talk to you today about the potential power of ethical humility for promoting ethical cultures. Much like beginner's mind, ethical humility means approaching situations with openness and curiosity, free from preconceived notions, allowing for a wider range of potential solutions. And this is compared to experts who might be limited by their established knowledge and experience. I have no financial conflicts of interest to disclose, no sponsors, no kickbacks, not even a free meal from a pharmaceutical rep. Maybe I'm doing something wrong, but at least for now, there's nothing to disclose. So I'm going to be introducing the importance of ethical cultures and the role of ethical humility, including introducing some key concepts for thinking about ethical humility, talking about the challenges of fear and ambiguity and the benefits of ethical humility for embracing fear and ambiguity as a framework for promoting ethical cultures, before describing some practical applications and key takeaways. So if you're watching this video, you probably already believe that ethical cultures matter, but why do they matter? Well, ethical cultures form the foundation of trust, transparency, and accountability in professional settings. And in doing so, promote environments that are conducive to open communication, mutual respect, and effective decision-making. So let me introduce some key concepts. Although definitions vary for this talk, I'm going to borrow this definition, which is that humility is the ability to realistically assess one's limitations and strengths. Now, in part because I believe that diversity and ethics are inextricably linked, I like to draw on concepts from the literature related to cultural competence and humility to think about ethical competence and humility. At the most basic level, we can think about cultural competence as cultural awareness and knowledge, as well as possessing the skills needed to apply that awareness and knowledge across a variety of settings. Of course, the problem with cultural competence as a construct is that it's difficult, if not impossible, to gain mastery over another culture or cultures. So recognizing this, scholars introduced the concept of cultural humility in the fields of public health and medicine over 20 years ago to emphasize the importance of continuous self-reflection, openness to learning, and acknowledging the limits of one's knowledge rather than assuming mastery over another culture. So similar to cultural competence, the focus of ethical competence is ethical awareness, knowledge, and skills, and the ability to make ethical decisions that are informed by one's knowledge, values, and skills. However, in the same way that it's difficult, if not impossible, to gain mastery over another culture or cultures, it's difficult to gain mastery over every possible ethical issue you might encounter through the course of your professional work, even if you have expertise in ethics. So that is to say that ethical competence alone may not suffice without ethical humility. Building on research suggesting a relationship between humility and ethical behavior and the literature on cultural humility, ethical humility acknowledges the limitations of our ethical knowledge, allows us to embrace diverse perspectives and values and the ways in which those perspectives and values might affect our interpretations of what is ethical or how to apply ethical codes, and also helps us to accept ambiguity while minimizing fear and rigidity. So this is in contrast with the need for certainty, which can impair ethical decision-making. Some scholars have argued that moral and intellectual humility is a virtue, and others argue that ethicists must be humble and that practicing ethics requires humility. In essence, ethical humility is at least important, if not more important, than ethical expertise. Either way, the consensus is that ethical competence and ethical humility are important. So while ethical competence and ethical humility are important for ethical decision making, ethical certainty, or the need for ethical certainty, can impair ethical decision making. The ethically humble embrace fear and ambiguity, while the ethically certain avoid fear and ambiguity. And why does this matter when thinking about building ethical cultures? Well, I'll tell you. Fear can create defensiveness, inhibit transparency, and stifle communication and innovation. Discomfort with ambiguity can lead to rigid, overly simplistic ethical decisions and devalue nuanced approaches and diverse perspectives. Both fear and discomfort with ambiguity can undermine trust and accountability. So if ethical certainty is a barrier to promoting ethical cultures, then ethical humility should help to promote ethical cultures. Drawing on some of the literature in leadership and management, we know that leadership humility, assuming it's genuine, builds trust and commitment among employees and within organizations, and helps build ethical cultures. Of course, it's not enough to espouse ethical humility. There also must be accountability, which comes in the form of applying ethical humility. So ethical humility can help reduce fear by encouraging openness to mistakes and growth, promoting transparency and dialogue, and fostering accountability without blame. And in doing so, ethical humility can help enable nuanced ethical decision-making by valuing flexibility and diversity, helping us to balance competing values and perspectives. So how might we use this information to promote ethical cultures? Well, first, we can use this information to help develop self-awareness. Specifically, we can encourage people to recognize biases and limitations and reflect on personal and professional values. Second, we can foster dialogue by encouraging open discussions about ethics, prioritizing listening over asserting certainty. Third, we can help people to embrace ambiguity by framing uncertainty as an opportunity for growth and training for adaptability and sensitivity to context. Finally, we can model ethical humility by demonstrating openness and vulnerability and rewarding behaviors that align with ethical humility. There are many practical applications for thinking about ethical humility. For example, in educational settings, we can integrate ethical humility into ethics and other curricula, and more broadly, can incorporate this concept as part of efforts to teach reflection and critical thinking. For example, a college course might include discussions on ethical humility by encouraging students to acknowledge the limits of their knowledge and consider different viewpoints before forming conclusions. In organizational contexts, training programs focused on self-awareness and dialogue can be developed, and we can look for ways to encourage flexibility and openness in existing or new policies. For example, a company might implement leadership training that teaches managers to actively listen to employees' concerns and adapt policies based on team feedback. In the context of research and consulting, we can prioritize stakeholder input and diverse perspectives and emphasize process over immediate certainty. For example, a research team working on a social policy study might ensure they gather insights from marginalized communities before making recommendations rather than assuming they know the best approach. And in patient care, ethical humility can be used to promote consultation and self-reflection in the face of inevitable ethical dilemmas. For example, a doctor facing an uncertain diagnosis might consult with colleagues and respect the patient's values and preferences before making a final treatment decision. Of course, we can think of many more examples because most of us have experienced personally or through observation the application of ethical humility, even if it wasn't framed that way. So the point here is to be more methodical and strategic about applying the concept of ethical humility more systematically in our work. So you might be wondering, what does this look like in practice? Because I'm a psychologist, I'm going to give a few examples from the mental health field. In the first example, I want you to imagine a therapist is working with a young adult client who's struggling with suicidal ideation, but has not expressed an immediate plan or intent to harm themselves. The therapist understands that confidentiality is a core ethical principle, but also knows that protecting the client's safety is a priority. However, the ethics code does not provide clear-cut answers in this nuanced situation. Should the therapist break confidentiality and initiate civil commitment against the client's will, perhaps? Or should they honor the client's autonomy while continuing to assess risk for suicide? If the therapist operates from a place of fear, they might rigidly adhere to a black and white interpretation of ethical rules, either breaching confidentiality too soon, potentially damaging trust and deterring the client from seeking future help, or avoiding difficult conversations out of fear of making the wrong decision and, as a result, risking harm to the client. This fear-driven approach impedes ethical behavior by prioritizing self-protection on the part of the psychologist over thoughtful ethical deliberation. However, if the therapist embraces ethical humility, they acknowledge the complexity of the situation, seek consultation or supervision, and engage in reflective decision-making. They can embrace the uncertainty rather than fearing it, recognizing that ethical practice is not always about having a perfect answer, but about navigating dilemmas with openness, care, and a willingness to learn. By replacing fear with ethical humility, the therapist increases the chances of making a well-reasoned decision, balancing ethical principles, collaborating with the client, and documenting their reasoning process, all of which ultimately enhance ethical behavior rather than hinder it. As another example, imagine a mental health professional notices feelings of attraction toward a client. While they're committed to maintaining professional boundaries, they still feel ashamed and conflicted about their feelings. They know the ethical guidelines prohibit romantic relationships with clients, but they also recognize that attraction is a natural human experience. While the ethics code makes clear what not to do not act on these feelings, the ethics code does not provide specific guidance on how to navigate such feelings. It only emphasizes the importance of avoiding harm and maintaining professional boundaries. If the therapist operates from a place of fear and discomfort with ambiguity, they might either deny or suppress their feelings, believing that even acknowledging them makes them unethical. And this fear-driven response can lead to rigid defensive behaviors, such as creating unnecessary emotional distance or avoiding certain discussions with the client. Additionally, the therapist might avoid seeking consultation out of fear that colleagues will judge them as unprofessional or unethical. Ironically, this fear of appearing unethical can increase the risk of ethical missteps by preventing open reflection and guidance. However, if the therapist embraces ethical humility and comfort with ambiguity, they recognize that the situation is not black and white. They can accept the complexity of human emotions without judgment and focus on how to respond ethically rather than fearing the existence of the feelings themselves. Instead of allowing uncertainty to paralyze them, they can consult with a trusted supervisor or colleague, engage in self-reflection, and implement intentional boundaries to ensure that their professional role remains intact. By replacing fear with ethical humility and a willingness to navigate ambiguity, the therapist remains transparent, accountable, and ethically grounded. Ethical humility allows them to acknowledge complexity rather than avoid it, ensuring they act in their client's best interest while maintaining professional integrity. There, of course, are many challenges, as there might be resistance to embracing ambiguity and overcoming fears of vulnerability. In the same way that systemic inequities and power imbalances affect cultural humility, these same factors can influence ethical humility. And shifting entrenched organizational or professional cultures is difficult. However, incorporating the concept of ethical humility into our professional lives creates opportunities to build more inclusive, dynamic environments and to enhance professional adaptability and decision-making and promote long-term ethical resilience. In conclusion, ethical humility complements ethical competence by fostering flexibility and openness, which can help us face our fears and discomfort with ambiguity, which ultimately hinder unethical behavior. Building ethical cultures requires intentional focus on ethical humility, dialogue, and inclusivity. And while organization or professional change is difficult, the place we can start is to model and reinforce ethical humility in our professional lives and in our interactions with others. So remember, in the beginner's mind, there are many opportunities. In the expert's mind, there are few. I would like to thank my graduate student, Molly Londot, for her assistance with the preparation of these slides. And if you're interested in perusing my many references, you can link to this QR code. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I'm wishing you an ethically humble day.